Hello out there. My name is Julia Rogers. I'm a professional gap year counselor, and today I'm going to give you a somewhat short but definitely fun overview about what a gap year is, why you want to consider taking one, what types of things you can do on a gap year, and how to get started with planning a great gap year. So, first, a little bit about me so you know where I'm coming from. I am based in Vermont and I am a gap year alum myself. After college, I spent about a year in Tanzania doing public health outreach. And after that experience, I came away saying, hey, what if I had done that before college? College would have been so much more meaningful to me. So now I help students all around the world plan customized and curated gap year itineraries that really fit their goals and budget. Today, we're going to be talking about kind of why you might want to choose this path and why it's growing in popularity. Let's start with a working definition of a gap year. I define a gap year as a structured period of personal growth supported by activities of enrichment. You may notice within that definition that there's a lot of room for nuance. A gap year is really about customizing a period of time that suits your interests, your passions, your budget, the locations that you want to spend time in, and that help set you up for success in the future. So really think of it as a rite of passage. This concept, a gap year concept, is not a new idea. People have been doing this for decades and decades overseas. It even goes back into Aboriginal cultures and indigenous cultures about having this kind of formative moment where you're stepping into adulthood. You sometimes go wander away from home and seek and explore and grow. And that's really at the heart of a gap year experience, is giving yourself the time and the runway to really figure out who you are, what you want to do, and who you want to be as an adult without the pressures of the formal academic environment and with your compass kind of driving the whole process. It's a really powerful period of time. I highly recommend you encourage it. And just as another point of reference, I have been working with hundreds of students over the years, and I've never heard anybody say they regretted taking a gap year. So go find someone you know who's taken a gap year, ask them if what they did, what they liked about it, and their tips, and I guarantee you're going to get some great advice as well. So, some of the things that come up when people are asking me about whether they're thinking about taking a gap year or deciding on whether or not it might be a good fit for them is, what are the benefits? What are the pros? What are the cons? So I would say that I'll start with the pros. The pros of taking a gap year are pretty much endless. There's a lot of data that suggests that taking a gap year can really increase your personal growth, your confidence, your maturity. And that's students who say that. In a survey from the Gap Year Association, they surveyed thousands of students, and 95% of them said that their gap year helped set them up for success in their next step of adulthood. And 98% of them said that their gap year increased their confidence and maturity. And 84% said it increased their academic motivation. So if you're feeling burnout at the end of high school, a gap year can actually be like a really good palate cleanse. It really reignites that curiosity for learning because you're still going to be engaging intellectually on your gap year. It's just not going to be necessarily academic in the traditional sense. So that can be really nice for students who need a little bit of a break from the classroom, even though they want to go to college. Other benefits include discovering what you might want to study in college. College is a really expensive endeavor, and we want to make sure that you know why you're there when you show up. Not necessarily what you want to do with your life, because no one knows that, but you definitely want to get some clues as to what degree you want, what you might want to do for an industry or career. And those clues can definitely be spent, you can gather those clues on your gap year. So I highly suggest spending some time doing career exploration on part or some of your gap year. We also see gap year students having higher GPAs at college and graduating sooner than traditional students. So again, when the finances come into play, like, your parents don't want to shell out thousands of dollars for you to take 6 years to graduate with a 4-year degree. So a gap year can actually front load some of that learning and growth so that when you actually get to college, you're there to learn, you're there to graduate, and you know what you're doing. Similarly, if a 4-year college is not your path, a gap year is a great first step into deciding what that next higher education step is going to be. So maybe it's vocational school, maybe it's the military, maybe it's community college, maybe it's an apprenticeship. Whatever your path is, a gap year is a really good stepping stone so that you can feel confident in that next step. So let's transition. Cons. So I think there's a couple of things to consider, I would say. I wouldn't even call them cons to taking a gap year, but things to consider would be finances and making sure that taking a gap year doesn't affect your financial aid package at a future college. I'm not saying that. So the actual finances of a gap year are quite feasible. Gap years can be very affordable. You can self-finance them. You can get scholarships. You can do AmeriCorps programs that don't cost any money. So you can do a gap year for little or no money. But you do want to make sure that taking a gap year doesn't affect your college scholarship prospects in any significant way. And that is a question for your school counselor or your future college to kind of discuss. Secondly, if you're not motivated to take a gap year, like if you're just floating through life in high school and you anticipate you'd be floating through life in college, then a gap year is not like a magic potion that's going to give you motivation. Like you still have to really take the bull by the horns when it comes to taking a gap year. So if you're undermotivated, I don't think you should necessarily go straight to school, but you really need to think critically about how to utilize a gap year with structure so that you develop some of those skills and you develop that motivation so that you can take that next step. You can't get dragged along in a gap year. You just can't. It's gotta come from you. Other than that, there's really no cons to taking a gap year. Sometimes I hear students tell me like, oh, I'm concerned about being a year older than people at college and that kind of thing. But when I talk to students on the back end of their gap time, they never ever seem concerned about that. So I think it's a concern on the front end when you're considering a gap year. It doesn't end up panning out as a real difference when you get to college campuses because A, gap years are becoming more common, and B, lots of people take time out during college or have come to college at different ages for other reasons. So chances are once you get into the college pool, things tend to even out over the course of your college experience anyway. So how do you plan a gap year? It's definitely a different planning process than going to college and planning for college. So here's how I describe it to people. It's the exact opposite of the college application process. Does that sound good? It probably does. So the college admissions process, as it is today, is basically creating and curating a profile of yourself that a school decides if they want to accept or not. And a gap year is the opposite of that. A gap year asks you, what do you want to do? What do you want to explore? Where do you want to go? There are very, very few gap year programs that are exclusive or hard to get into or anything like that. Most have the baseline requirement of enthusiasm. That's what most gap year opportunities are looking for in an applicant, if there even is an application process. So if you are self-motivated to have an experience, you can likely very much make it happen on your gap year. So this is really, really empowering, especially for high school juniors and seniors who are a little disillusioned by the college application process. A gap year is really a choose your own adventure. But within that, because it is so vast, it can be overwhelming at first when you start Googling different program ideas or like kind of just jumping into researching and things like that. So my advice is to take a breath and to really kind of think through what you want out of your gap time. And so I break this down into a 3-step process. It's called dream, define, design. I should really know it if I'm the one talking about it, but dream, define, design. So dreaming is where you're brainstorming, where you sit down at the kitchen table with your family or you're chatting with your friends on a car trip and you just like think about all the things you might want to do on your gap year. Oh, I'd like to spend time learning guitar, or I really want to go to Thailand because I've always wanted to go to Southeast Asia, or I really want to work with animals because I think I might want to go into conservation biology. Any of those things you can use as like a basis to create your own gap year. So rather than just going online and just Googling gap year programs and trying to find out which one sounds coolest, start from what you want to do on your gap year, anything, because basically anything can be accommodated on a gap year within reason. Next thing is kind of after you dream about the kind of wider things, you're defining those goals for your gap time. So you're saying, I'd like to, gain my confidence and do some personal goals. I'd like to learn about conservation biology as a professional goal. And I'd like to get my driver's license as a practical goal. So personal, practical, and professional goals are a great kind of baseline to kind of do that brainstorming process. And then it comes to designing, which is kind of crafting your gap year, like laying it out month by month. What are you going to be doing? Where are you going to be? How much is it going to cost? And then you have, before you know it, a plan for your year. And so one thing to know is that most gap year students do multiple things throughout their year. So it's really common to graduate and then work from home for the summer, go away and do something for the fall, maybe come home for the holidays, and then go off and do another set of things, one or two, or sometimes more things between the new year and like the following summer. So, when you're thinking about what you want to do on your gap year, one thing might be more expensive than another thing, or one thing might be in a different place and one thing might be closer to home. There's no wrong way to coordinate things. So just kind of play around with an itinerary that makes sense for you. So I'm going to overlay a slide for this next section because there's a lot to go through, but there's so much out there. I think that when most people are considering a gap year, they don't actually understand how many different things are available to them. So I want to talk a little bit about types of gap year opportunities. So kind of there's two bigger categories of what you can do in a gap year, and one is programs and one is self-designed activities. Programs are things you join. You find them online, you apply, you do something, and there's a structure to it. Self-designed experiences are kind of self-explanatory. You do it yourself. You create the experience yourself. And sometimes there's less structure in those, but maybe more flexibility or more customization possible. So you can mix and match these elements. So think of them as more of a framework to understand what's out there, and then you can figure out what makes sense for you. So on the program side of things, one of the most common types of gap year programs, and this comes up if you start Googling gap year programs, are experiential semesters or experiential programs. These programs really run the gamut. Some are really outdoorsy, some are more cultural, some are service learning based, but typically they all contain a peer group, meaning other gap year students, usually aged 18 to 22. And you're with leaders that are experts in that area that you're traveling, and they help facilitate all the logistics and the learning. And you just get to have a really cool experience that's kind of the flavor that you want. So that might be backpacking in the Rocky Mountains, or that might be language learning in France, or that might be doing a variety of different things throughout Latin America. But they're typically, 1 to 4 months long, sometimes a little bit longer, and you have a really solid group experience. There's also volunteering, and this is different than the experiential programs because volunteering, you're typically in one place, serving a community or serving a project site. And that can be, domestically here in the States or across the world, of course. And you tend to have a little bit more flexibility in how long you stay. But of course, if you're volunteering, stay as long as you can, because the longer you stay, the more you can help. There's also enrichment courses. And these are basically courses that you might take to advance a personal interest. So the idea is, and some of them can be a little bit more work related, like you could learn how to code, or you could take a MOOC course online or something like that. But you can also learn ceramics in Italy, or you could learn how to scuba dive in Belize, or you can learn how to build a guitar from scratch in England. I mean, the opportunities are endless. So if there's something you've always wanted to learn, there's a course to suit you for that. National service is another really great opportunity. So you may have heard of AmeriCorps. AmeriCorps is basically the domestic arm of the Peace Corps. If you're a high school graduate, 18 plus, you qualify for a bunch of different programs, including things like City Year, NCCC, Public Allies, and these are all like 9 or 10-month programs that have a living stipend and give you an education award that you can use towards higher education after your program is finished. So definitely consider national service if you are on a budget, or if you just want to stay domestic and give back to a community, because whether it's teaching or working on public lands or helping out in communities, there's so much work to be done in our own country as well. Lastly, there's interning as a program. And intern programs are actually really cool because if you're interested in that career development, these programs match you with a project site in a place that you want to do an internship. So usually this is done abroad in places like Dublin or South Africa, but increasingly there's more sites available in the States as well, in places like Massachusetts and Chicago and even LA. So the difference between interning by finding like your own site and an intern program is that they usually provide housing and they help with that kind of internship match and professional development. So consider that if you're really interested in a career related experience, but don't have the connections yourself. So next we have self-designed experiences. So these are going to be things, again, that you're kind of building from the ground up yourself. Travel is, of course, one of the hallmarks of a gap year experience, whether it's a road trip in the States to visit friends at college or our national parks, or traveling abroad as an addition to a structured program, or on your own with friends, or meeting up with family, whatever the case may be. Travel is definitely something I encourage people to do on their gap time. Local opportunities. Not everybody, you don't need to go halfway around the world to have a really amazing gap year. Just think about getting out of your bubble. So if you grew up in high school and you never volunteered locally, or you never went to a certain neighborhood and found out what that subculture was all about, your gap year is a great opportunity to do that kind of stuff. So find local opportunities, whether it's work related or interning or a course in your own community for some of your gap year. That'd be great. Working is, of course, really common because a lot of people self-fund their gap year, meaning that they earn money on their gap year or before their gap year to help pay for other experiences. So it's pretty common to work for half a year and then travel or be away from home for half a year. So think about that if you're on a budget. And there's also destination work. That means working away from home, but still earning money. So it's really common to get resort jobs or destination work jobs in places out west, like Sedona or the Rocky Mountains or ski resorts, that kind of thing. As we kind of emerge from pandemic times, more working holiday visas in places where we used to be able to go abroad to work are coming back online. So places like the UK and Ireland and Australia, New Zealand and Canada, they all have special visa programs for Americans that allow young people to go and work for like a set amount of time, usually up to a year. So that's a great way to like be in a different country, but still earn some money. Personal projects is another great thing. Every year, I come across stories of people who do amazing and interesting things over the course of their gap year. Last year, there were this duo of guys who went to every state and fished for the state fish. It was called Fish All 50. It was a very fun project to follow. Another young woman she converted a passenger van into just like a bus that she took around to all the national parks and things like that. So if you have just something that you want to do that's really out there and creative, a gap year is the perfect time for that kind of experimentation. And lastly, there's work exchange. So this might be something you've already heard of in the form of woofing or workaway. This is the idea of work stays in other places. So usually you're not earning money necessarily, but you're usually getting free room and board, so free food and lodging in exchange for your labor. And typically you're working like a 4 or 5 hour work day. So there's plenty of time to explore, and you can do things like work on a goat farm in Tuscany, or help build an eco lodge in Costa Rica, or learn how to shear sheep in New Zealand. There are so many opportunities. It's very cool. It's something that I've done personally in 4 or 5 countries, and I highly recommend if you are independent and okay with the idea of like flexible and solo travel. So as you can see, that kind of framework of the different categories of opportunities represents literally thousands, probably tens of thousands of opportunities that are out there. So that's why when it comes to planning your gap year, you got to start from what you want to do and not just get lost in like the Internet of Things. You also want to think about geography. Where do you want to be? Do you want to do stuff virtually online as well as maybe locally for some of your year? Do you want to stay in the States? Are you okay with going abroad? If you want to go abroad, where? Where are languages that you're interested in learning spoken? Or if you've already studied something in school, where can you go practice that language? That's a really fun thing to do on gap time. Where do you have family and friends? Increasingly, people know people who are in other places that might be fun to stay for a little while. I have a student this year who's going to be au pairing in Italy for a family friend. That's a pretty cool gig. So think about the people in your network who you might be able to tap for geographic advice or maybe actual resources or places to stay. So we could probably talk about programs all day long, and I encourage you to reach out to me if you want to talk more. But I did want to touch on the college deferral process for all of you out there who are planning to apply to college and want to go to a 4-year school. This is typically what you do. High school seniors, you're going to be spending most of your fall getting those college essays done, getting your applications out the door. And after those college applications are out the door is typically when you turn your attention to planning your gap year. But you still don't know where you got into school. So how can you plan your gap year? Well, here's the thing. Most colleges allow you to defer your admission. So that basically means like accepting that you want to go to that school, but putting it on hold for a year. And the process for doing that is once you are accepted to a school, you usually have a grace period in which you put down your deposit to confirm your, acceptance. And then you have a little bit of time to write a letter or a proposal to the admissions office saying, hey, I'm taking a gap year. Here's what I want to do. Please allow me to come next year instead. And the admissions office will review it, and then hopefully they will rubber stamp it, and then they hold your spot for a year. It's so easy, and it's pretty straightforward. And increasingly, colleges are open to this tactic because it helps them, it helps you. Colleges like gap years because the students arrive on campus more mature and with more experiences under their belt. So why wouldn't a college like that? To know for certain if your colleges that are on your list or that you're applying to are deferral or gap year friendly, you want to either ask them outright during your college visits or ask the admissions officer. It is not a bad thing to ask them if they are gap year friendly, or you can look on the website because sometimes in the admissions section they have a specific section on gap years. Or you can also check the Gap Year Association website under the college section. They also have a not exhaustive, but pretty robust deferral policy list as well that goes college by college. So, when it comes to second semester senior year, that's really when you want to be putting your plans in place so that when it comes time to be, May, June, you're graduating, you kind of have a plan and you know what you can say to people when they say, so what are you doing for your gap year? So that's a good goal. You can always plan earlier, but it's good to frame things out up until senior year, because if you change your mind, you don't want to be locked into something that you don't necessarily want to do. Also on my blog, which is enroutegapyear.com, I do have a deferral letter template that you can take a look at for the language about how to write a deferral letter. So that's pretty handy as well. So that's pretty much an introductory lesson in all about gap year things. Again, my name is Julia Rogers, and if you are interested in talking to me one-on-one, I do offer free introductory calls with a student and ideally their parents, and we have a chat and I hear about your interests and how a gap year might look for you. We talk about it, and then if you decide you want a little bit of help with planning, I do offer consultation packages for people who want to work together in a more intense way so that we can craft that really customized and cool itinerary. But either way, anyone is entitled to a free introductory call. And usually people do that sometime senior year of high school or like summer before. So with that, please email me or find me on social media and we can connect that way too. I'm active on Instagram and TikTok at enroutegapyear, and you can email me at enrouteconsulting, all one word, @gmail.com. Thanks so much for watching, and subscribe to see more videos about gap year planning.